Again, thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Cole Jordan. I'm the grant manager for the State Budget Office. And this morning we're going to go over the closeout process. I will do a quick overview of the steps that it'll take, and then we'll do a deeper dive into each step and how to make sure you've accomplished that step for closeout. So the main checklist, if you think your grant is ready to be closed out, is to first make sure that all expenses submitted are included in the scope of in your scope of work. 2, all expenses are submitted and the balance on your smart sheet is 0. All interest earned has been submitted in the amount as it was received. And step 4, a Yellow Book audit is submitted for grants that hit the grant amount threshold. And step 5, all quarterly performance reports are submitted, including a final quarterly performance report that states all funds have been spent and the project related to this grant is complete. So we'll talk about the sheet summary quite a bit today. And so when I reference that all expenses submitted and that your balance is 0, that's where you're going to find it. It's on your smart sheet. It's a summary that summarizes all the expenses and tells you what your current balance is. So that's kind of the first step to make sure your grant's ready for closeout. So step 1, again, as we mentioned, all expenses submitted are included in your scope of work. So you want to look at your smart sheet and make sure that what you have on your scope of work that you submitted to our office and what it was approved is listed on your scope of work. If you have expenses that you didn't refer to in your scope of work, we're going to either need you to update your scope of work or remove those expenses. So make sure to, when you are reviewing the expenses that have been submitted to your smart sheet, that they are also on your scope of work. Step 2, you want to make sure all expenses are submitted and the balance on your smart sheet is 0. So as I was mentioning, this is what your smart sheet looks like. If you are at this stage in the process, you should be very familiar with your smart sheet. This is where you submit all of your reports for your grant. If you wanted to check on the balance, you would click on the little icon on the right-hand side of the screen, which would open up this view. And from here, you can see a lot of information, including the balance of your grant. So it should be at $0. The grants that we've administered were all paid up front. So we know you can't overspend your grant funds. What happens sometimes is people will have a negative balance, and that's because you've probably entered in an invoice where you used other sources of funds other than the grant funds, and you want to make sure that you reach out to your grant administrator and request that they update any expenses that maybe you either entered in incorrectly or attributed an amount that was not just grant funds, that maybe you use your general fund to pay for that invoice too. We only ever need to see the expense amount related to the grant funds. So if you ever need to make a correction, reach out to your grant administrator, let them know the item number for that expense and what change needs to be made. For example, for this one expense, if I had an incorrect amount, which I would scroll over towards the right on this page, if this was the actual link and not an image, I'd scroll over, see what the amount was. If that was incorrect, I would reach out to my grant administrator with the item number and what correction I need made, and then we can make that on your behalf. So some further information about expenses. Expenses are typically, what we're having to reach out and clarify the most during the closeout process. So you want to make sure your expenses are not aggregated. They need to be listed as individual expenses. Even if it's the same purchases from the same location, it should be matching your general ledger. So it needs to show one for one what expenses were made. Individual submissions for each expense. Individual submissions made by any subrecipients. So if you have a subrecipient, you should not be submitting an expense as a disbursement to the subrecipient. Instead, you should be listing the subrecipient's actual expenses, right? We need to see where the end result was for each dollar, every penny spent with state funds. Employee expenses should be submitted by each pay period. Interest earned should be submitted as it is received. And for any approved expenses incurred before receiving funds, report the actual date of the expense and the vendor that was paid for the expense, not as a reimbursement to your organization. Anytime we see reimbursement, that's a big red flag for us because we need to be actually seeing where did that money actually go. Supporting documentation is not submitted during the quarterly reporting. It's only required to be submitted if requested by OSBM or the state auditor. So during the closeout process, a lot of times we will request some supporting documentation. So just make sure you've always got that handy. It's clearly defined and easily accessible because that's going to be subject for review up to 5 years after your project's complete. All right, another big expense issue that we come across is sales tax. So if your organization is eligible for tax reimbursement, so that's whether or not you request that tax reimbursement, if you are eligible to do so or eligible to apply for it, then you cannot use state grant funds on sales tax unless you do one of two things. You either replace the money with your general fund or another source of funds, right? So you maybe went out and paid for an expense with your grant funds, but you're going to reimburse the grant funds with your general fund for the sales tax amount. And that way you can handle your sales tax completely separately, which is what we recommend because the alternative is requesting that reimbursement from the state and then waiting for that reimbursement to come back in. Which can take some time depending on when you request that reimbursement and when the state actually provides that reimbursement back to you. So a couple different ways are offered to submit this depending on your organization because everyone has a slightly different situation. So in this example with this receipt, first off, if you're not eligible, so if you're a private company or our community colleges, then you're not eligible for tax exemption and therefore you can use the state grant funds on sales tax. So you would just report the full vendor amount. Sales tax option 1. So this is a way to show what your actual receipt says, but you are pulling out the sales tax amount so that it's not charged to the grant. So in that case, you would put the full vendor total and then add the sales tax amount into the sales tax column. Option 2 is say you went ahead and separated it before you even made the payment. In that case, you would do $100 for the vendor total because you never charge state grant funds to the sales tax, and you'd put the vendor total and just completely leave out the sales tax. Option 3 is that reimbursement from the state. So in that scenario, you would put the full vendor total amount, but then you would submit a reimbursement entry once it's received, and then that would add it back to your grant total, and you could align your expenses that way. Whichever option you choose, you want to be consistent. No matter what option you're doing, just be consistent throughout, and that way it'll provide some clarity and make it a much easier process when it goes to closing out your grant. All right, and just another big reminder on fund accounting, we come across this more often than we would like to say, but you want to make sure you're not commingling your state grant funds. This is for any amount of grants that you have. Each grant needs to be treated separately. It needs to be accounted for separately. So there are 2 ways to not commingle or mix your grant funds with other sources of funds. Option one is if you have a fund accounting system. So that's an accounting system that supports fund accounting where each source of funds is accounted for separately. Typically, this is our larger organizations, ones that deal with multiple sources of funds and have funding to pay for a system like this. Option two is a separate bank account. So if you don't have the capacity to have an accounting system or the funding to do so, just put your each state grant in a different bank account. And that way you never have to worry about mixing any sources of funds together. And you can show your bank statement as your general ledger, and that'll match your receipts one-to-one. This is typically our smaller organizations that only handle, maybe a few sources of funds, or maybe this is their first grant they've received ever. All right, step three, all interest earned has been submitted in the amount as it is received. So any interest you earn on your state fund shall be used for the same purposes for which it is made. This is state law. Anything we're referencing is really because of state law and regulations that we have to follow. So interest earned shall be used back on the grant. So make sure you're reporting that to us as it is received, and staying up to date on that. We recommend, submitting expenses as they occur so that you're not having to backtrack too much. So a few reminders on funding sources and how to use it. Just reminder not to use it for non-sectarian, non-religious, or it's only to be used for non-sectarian, non-religious purposes only. If you are a nonprofit, you can only pay an employee $140,000 in state funds annually. So make sure you're not exceeding that on an annual basis. If you have travel or travel mileage, meals, lodging, anything like that, make sure you have supporting documentation, timesheets, travel logs, any receipts from hotels, gas. Make sure you've got that documentation in place, and state rates should be used as guidelines. Expenditure of grants for any grant recipient or subrecipient shall be in accordance with the cost principles of the Code of Federal Regulations. That really just means that everything should be reasonably a reasonable amount, so you shouldn't be overpaying for things with state grant funds. All right, step four is the audit requirement. So if you have received a total in state funds, so that's any state funds from any state grant funds from any agencies. So if you've received a grant from us and another grant from the Department of Health and Human Services and another one from Environmental Quality, you have to add the total of that, of whether you've received, held, used, or expended within your fiscal year. So there was a change in the amount that requires an audit. So any fiscal year that ended June 30th, 2024 or before, if you received, held, used, or expended 500,000 or more, you need to submit a Yellow Book audit for each fiscal year. And that's June 30th, 24 or before. Now, moving forward, the administrative code changed so that it would match the federal regulations. Federal fiscal years end in September. So once the state threshold changed July 1st, 2024, the current federal threshold was 750,000. So between July 1st and September 30th, 2024, if you happen to have a fiscal year end in September, then the threshold would have been 750. That's a very small percentage of folks. More than likely, you're either going to be in this bucket or this bucket. So anything prior to June 30th, 2024 is a $500,000 threshold. Now moving forward, so for fiscal year 24-25, that new threshold is $1 million. So again, it's still the total in state grant funds that you received, held, used, or expended. But the new threshold moving forward is $1 million. All Yellow Book audits are due 9 months after your fiscal year end. So if you had a audit that would have been due for last fiscal year ending in June, your audit was due by the end of March. If your fiscal year ended in December, then it would be due by the end of September. We cannot close out your grants until we receive those audits. So just stay in touch with your grant administrator about that. You will not, if you've completed everything except for your audit, then you don't have to continue to submit reports. But just make sure with your grant administrator that everything is aligned and correct. All right, step 5 is your quarterly and final performance report. So this is your quarterly performance report. You have to submit a report for every quarter that from when you receive the funds and until you spent all of your funds. And so make sure that all of those are submitted, and I can show you how to check that in just a moment. But when it comes to your final report, you're still going to use your quarterly performance report. There's not a separate form. You just want to make sure that you've stated that all funds have been spent and the project related to this grant is complete. A lot of times, grantees will use these grant funds towards a project, but maybe it hasn't completed construction, or maybe they've got a second grant that they're going to use. In their final report, they'll say the project's still ongoing. We hope to have this done by X date. That doesn't clearly define to us that this grant is completed, right? So you want to, anytime you're reporting for one of your grants, anything you fill out, make sure you're referencing it as it applies to that particular grant. So in your final quarterly performance report, if you end at the end of a quarter, you can just use that quarter's quarterly performance report to state what's happened, what's been completed, and then at the end, in the final performance measure, state all funds have been spent and the project related to this grant is complete. That'll clearly show us that, okay, this grantee is ready for closeout. And if you by some reason, the balance was off, or we are missing some other information, this is going to clue us to reaching out to you and figuring out, okay, your balance is off, it's negative, or you still got a balance left. Let's take these next steps to close out your grant. All right, so when I was talking about checking your quarterly performance report, when I was showing you the sheet summary, this is also a place, if you continued to scroll down that sheet summary, you would see information on your QPR, so your quarterly performance report. There are 3 different statuses. First is in compliance. That's what you're going for, right? So you want to make sure it says in compliance. If it says that means all of your quarterly performance reports are submitted for each required reporting period. If it says mismatch, then more than likely you have more than you needed. So you probably need to check to make sure that you didn't record things for the wrong reporting period or submit duplicates. And if so, just let your grant administrator know. We'll fix that for you. And then if it's not in compliance, that means you're missing a quarterly performance report. If you want to figure out which quarterly performance report you're missing, you would just continue to scroll down the sheet summary. So let's say I'd continue to scroll down, you would start seeing the different quarters and whether or not one was due, right? So if it says no, it's not due, then you are good. But if it says yes, and then there is a missing indicator, that means that is the quarter for which you're missing a quarterly performance report. So all you need to do is go and submit a new quarterly performance report for that quarter. Make sure you choose the right quarter. It's going to be referencing the last month of the quarter that you're missing it for. And then you can go back in, refresh, and check your QPR compliance again. It's also going to show you the total due to date versus what's been received. So just another reminder in terms of monitoring and auditing, you are required to maintain supporting documentation for your grant for up to 5 years after the grant's been closed out. So just because your grant's closed out, don't get rid of your records. Keep that on file. We never know if the state auditor may reach out or something may come up with another grant and we may need to request that information. All grants are subject to being audited and inspected and monitored, including through the closeout process. And grantees must provide OSBM staff and the state auditor with access to financial and accounting records to support internal audit, financial reporting, and related requirements. So if you believe your grant's ready to be closed out, you've accomplished everything that you hope to, you've done the full checklist, please reach out to your grant administrator. If you're unsure of the email address for your grant administrator, you can always email ncgrants@osbm.nc.gov. I'm going to show you our website and where you can find more information about the closeout process in just a moment. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, there should be a question mark box in the bottom right hand corner of your screen. If you click on that, it'll open up a box where you can enter in any questions. So please feel free to put a question in that Q&A box, and we will get to those in just a moment. No question's a bad question. Everyone we find really benefits from hearing the questions from other grantees. So please pop them in there and we'll get to it in just a second. So for our website, if you go to osbm.nc.gov, you can go down to either our popular topics of directed grants or stewardship services, click on directed grants, and then you're going to go into the OSBM administered grants. From here, you've got the pre-award information, so what you had to fill out before receiving them, including some great videos and compliance and how to upload your quarterly performance report in case you forget. But to get to the reporting information, you want to click on reporting over here in this little section. And from here, you're going to have a lot of great information, including, if you scroll down to the bottom, how to close out your grant. So there's a shorter version of what we just went through. And we'll also have this recording up there as well as the slide deck here soon too. So please use that as a resource if you need it. And it looks like we've got a couple questions, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into those. Nathan said, sorry if I missed it. I had trouble with the audio. Will these slides be shared after the webinar? So we will put them on our website for sure. Just bear with us. It may take a few days to get it uploaded as our communications team handles that for that. So yes, it should be under here as well as under our reporting training video resources, where you can see some of our shorter videos and the training webinars. All right. Someone M says audits typically will happen after the project is done. So this would be several months after the last funds are spent. This is okay to wait for closeout since grant funds can be used for the audits. Yes, that's another great point. So audits can be paid for with grant funds, 100%, definitely, that is true. And so if you have a balance left over and the last thing you need to do is submit an audit, you will need to continue to submit quarterly performance reports until that money is spent. So just keep that in mind. But that's not a problem at all. And depending on how you're paying your auditor, maybe it's already spent, or maybe you're just using a portion of the grant funds to pay for it. But that would be the only little unfortunate caveat, is if you have any money left over, if you are only also needing an audit, you do need to continue to submit quarterly performance reports. Let's see if I can. I'm going to request to unmute you, M, and you'll have to accept it for that to come through. So make sure that helped to answer your question.
Because typically, fiscal year, the grant ends at the fiscal year.
Mm-hmm.
The fiscal year would end with the organization. So, of course, then they would have 9 months to submit that audit. So there'd be delay in that point. And like you said, then I guess we just continue quarterly reports until we can get that audit completed and accountable in the funding.
Yes. And if you wanted to check in, like in the meantime with your grant administrator, just to make sure everything looked good, I would highly recommend that. There's normally some back and forth just to clarify a few things. So in that time between there, I would definitely reach out and make sure everything was squared away.
Yeah, so definitely don't want to close out your grant if you're going to pay for the audit yet.
Right. But we can definitely go ahead and start that process and make sure we're reviewing it outside of that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, let's see. So Clint asked, what if your project came in under budget? Can we add to the scope of work to expend to 0? Great question. So yes, you absolutely can. We always want y'all to find a way to use your funding. We prefer that you do not return the funds. So that's going to be really determined on, dependent on your grant description. So how it was listed in legislation as to how it can be used. So as long as your grant description allows for that expense, you can add new expenses. You'll just want to update your scope of work, because as we talked about, all expenses submitted should be included on your scope of work. So you'll work with your grant administrator to update that scope of work so that those new expenses are approved prior to using them. And Clint, I am going to see if we can request to unmute you. I just sent you a request to make sure that helped to answer.
That answered my question. Like I said, we came in a little under, but I think there's some other little construction recovery costs that we could do. Just want to make sure.
Yeah, as long as it aligns with the grant purpose, then it should be good. Just make sure we're updating that scope of work before so that we can give you that approval and make sure everything's okay. All right, next question. Is there a deadline for the grant awards to be spent? SCIF grant versus a more recent award? Yes, Elizabeth, that is a great question. And so SCIF, so if you have a state capital infrastructure fund grant, those do not have a reversion date per se. You do have a contract end date, but they don't revert back to the state as of right now, right? So, and we don't anticipate that changing, but we never know. So we just always recommend, like get started on your project, continue to work on it. And then more recent award would depend on what it was. But if it's a directed grant and all of this, like your contract end date is what would tell you. There's also, I think it's section 3E of your contract talks about your reversion date. So if you have a directed grant in one of the more recent years, the majority of those revert June 30th, 2026. So Elizabeth, I'm going to request to unmute you, see if we can get some further. Okay, just sent the request. Hey, Elizabeth, did that help to answer it, or do you know what type of grant you have?
It's more recent, so I'm not as concerned about that one. I was more concerned about the SCIF grant being out there. We've got most of the project done. It's just a matter of these little things that we're trying to tie up, and I just wanted to make sure we were in compliance.
Sure. And I'd honestly say, like, because of the flexibility with the SCIF, like, we recommend some of our grantees, depending on the situation you're in, to like use the one that reverts back first. So if you're worried about using the money before June 30th, well, do you know your grant ID? And I can just double check for you real quick.
It is, I think, 30881 for the SCIF, and the other one's 882.
Got it. Yes. So 30882 will revert June 30th, 2026. So if you have any like concern about using that before then, I would use that before you use the SCIF.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, Edith said we are sub-grantee. Do we check the Smart Sheet summary the same way? Edith, you'll want to talk to the grantee about it, but it's kind of like a complicated question. I might see Edith if I can request to unmute you. I just sent you a request. Hey, Edith, are you a sub-grantee of an OSBM administered grant?
Yes.
So you didn't receive the money from OSBM, you received it from somebody else.
Correct.
So you would want to work with them because the sheet summary is going to refer to the full amount. What you could do is you could export it. So you can always export the Smart Sheet into an Excel doc.
Okay.
And then you could sort it by your subrecipient name. So if the entries are being entered in correctly, then your subrecipient name should be listed in this column for any of your expenses. So you could sort it by your organization's name and then go to the expenses and total it up from there.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, next question's from Kimberly. Hi, we will have expended all funds by the end of May. Do we need to wait until July 10th to submit the final quarterly report? No, that's another great question. You can go ahead and submit your final report now. So if you finish in the middle of your quarter, go ahead and get those documents in. Use the quarterly performance report, state that it is completed, and reach out to your grant administrator. We don't get like an alert, unfortunately, in our system when you're ready. So just shoot us an email if we haven't noticed it, and we can talk through that and start that process. And Kimberly, I request to unmute you. Let me know that helped. Hey, Kimberly, did that help answer your question?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. All right, next question's from Tambra. Is there any updates on when funds need to be exhausted? Also, if funds are allocated for construction, does this count if our construction is delayed? Tambra, I'm going to request to unmute you. This is very dependent on the grant. So I've just sent you a request.
From the other person. It's a directed grant.
Okay.
And since we have till June 30th, 2026, I think we're good. So thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Okay. Pearl asked, our spreadsheet shows closeout review. What does that mean? That's a great question. So our team has started this new piece. It's kind of this new step for us to kind of review it internally. So if it says closeout review, that means that we have been reviewing it for closeout. And maybe there's something that we're reaching out to you about. But it's really just a thing for us to track ourselves. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. But Pearl, I'm going to request to unmute you in case you've got any follow-up. Pearl, did that help? Hey, Pearl, I think you're unmuted. All right, if your mic's not working, if you want to put in another question in the Q&A, you can. Amy says, I submitted my final report this week. How I know that everything is finalized on the OSBM side. I also have a QPR mismatch list on the smart sheet. Is this something I need to worry about? A great question. So if you submit your final report this week, I'd reach out to your grant administrator, notify them of that. And so we can start working you through that process. If you have a mismatch, then more than likely you've got multiple quarterly reports for the same reporting period. But if it's like a situation where maybe you submitted 2 for last quarter because one was your quarterly performance and one was your final, we'll fix that for you. Just let us know. Mismatch is normally something we can just handle on our end. And it normally means you over-reported, which is always better than under-reporting. So Amy, I will request to unmute you. See if you've got your grant ID.
I appreciate you answering my question. I think that's all I needed to know.
Okay.
Hold on. I can't remember my grant ID. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Do you have your grant administrator's info?
It's me. I'm the
No,
grant
no, sorry,
administrator.
for our office.
Oh, yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Okay,
Wait
great.
a minute. Hold on a second. I've got physical. Let me look it up right quick. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I had it brought up there a second ago, and oh, I do not have it readily at hand. I am sorry.
That's okay. What is your what organization are you with?
Town of Mount Pleasant.
Okay, great. We'll make sure to look into that for you.
Okay.
I believe that's me, Amy. James Chatham.
Oh, yes. I
Great.
reached out to him this week and he gave me guidance on how to submit everything.
Perfect. Great. Well, we'll walk you through that process and let you know if there's anything else we need.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, Tracy's asking, what is the due date for the final closeout? That's dependent on your project, but also your grant. So Tracy, I'm going to request to unmute you. Hey, Tracy, I think you're unmuted.
Hi. Yeah, I'm just filling in for the person that normally does this. And so we have our project going. We're just getting the work started. I just wanted to make sure to ask the good question for her as when do we need to have that final closeout done?
So if you have a direct aid grant, then hopefully it would be before the reversion date, right? So that would be June 30th, 2026. But do you know your grant ID?
No, I don't. I'm with the Tom A. Finch Community YMCA.
Okay, I found it. So that is a direct aid grant. And so you do have until June 30th, 2026.
Okay, so we'll do our final closeout by then, right?
Yes, I mean, if your project's done now, you could go ahead and do the final closeout. So it really just any time between now and June 30th, 2026.
Okay, yeah. It's not done yet, but we're getting there. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. And I see that there's another question. Did that
No,
I think you put
you
in?
answered me. You're good.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. Let's see. All right, Pearl line is missing, but the reports are there. Pearl, I see your note about the issue with the line. So I think James would be your point of contact, and we'll make sure he gets in touch with you about the corrections that you need.
And sorry, Cole, Pearl, could you just type in what your grant ID is, just so I can go in and check that for you? Thank you.
Okay, I think that's the end of the questions. Just checking real quick. All right. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. Hope that was helpful. If you need anything, reach out to your grant administrator. That's what we're here for. We appreciate all the great work you're doing. And yeah, please use our website as a resource if you need it. And have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.